Ukraine has hit a key rail hub near Rostov and has done for the past 2 days as Putin continues to attack civilian targets in Kyiv and other cities.
Kyiv again.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. I'm standing in for Jerome Starkey. He's away on a very well-deserved break. Now, I'm coming at things from a slightly different perspective because I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and a NATO planner. So the key Russian railway hub at Novo-Cherkassk has been hit for 2 days by the Ukrainians. This is near Rostov, which is in the eastern side of the border between Russia and Ukraine. This is a key hub that is connecting the Russian rail infrastructure from Rostov to Voronezh, to Kamenesh, and is a vital Crimean rail link. The Russians move the majority of their logistics by rail from across Russia, and of course Rostov-on-Don is where the Russian headquarters is, that's coordinating all of the actions into Ukraine. It's significant for a number of reasons. One, it makes it difficult to resupply troops in that eastern part of Ukraine. Two, it makes it difficult to get resupplies in to go into Crimea, which is vital and is constrained by routes from here and across the Kerch Bridge. Three, it sends a very clear message to the Russian headquarters based in Rostov that the Ukrainians can attack critical infrastructure around them. And four, it will have a tactical impact for a period of time on Russia's ability to sustain its operations. It moves the majority of its logistics around by rail and then only at the very last minute puts it onto trucks to go in by road. And we're even getting reports of troops having to walk over 10 kilometres from the front line to pick up basics like water and ammunition and take them forward, because moving trucks in the drone-controlled environment is virtually impossible. As the Ukrainians continue to hit critical infrastructure in Russia, the Russians continue to hit civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. And their targeting has changed slightly. Yes, they've hit a Ukrainian gas pipeline and gas processing capability, and that's trying to hit Ukraine from an economic perspective, but it's also trying to set the conditions for a winter of discontent when it comes to attacks on power infrastructure. We're only a few short weeks away from the autumn and winter coming in, but this is something that Russia does on an annual basis. The other worrying change in tactics is Russia has fired some of its missiles and drones to hit outside the subway stations that the Ukrainian population are using to shelter from the attacks into Kyiv and into other cities. And what they're trying to do is collapse that infrastructure to create panic amongst the people. They're attacking the civilian population, they're attacking civilian infrastructure to try and break the will of the Ukrainian people. The reality is, from talking to Ukrainians and looking at what happens historically, quite the opposite happens. The Ukrainian resolve is firm and is likely to stay firm and get stronger. So, as we're recording this, the latest peace talks between the Russians and Ukrainians are set to go on this evening. Now, they're happening after we've recorded this, but as a former senior intelligence officer, I usually have my crystal ball, so let me tell you what I think is going to happen. Nothing really significant is going to come out of them. The Russians have entrenched themselves in a position where they still want the complete capitulation of Ukraine. The Ukrainians are still in a position where they want the Russians completely out of Ukraine, and therefore neither of them are on the same piece of paper. So if anything happens, it will be two things. One, a further agreement on prisoner swap. Well, we didn't have all the prisoners that were agreed at the last set of talks finally swapped yet, but that's still progress and still a move forward. The second thing is an agreement to further talks. Why are they doing this if they're not going to achieve anything? They're doing it to keep Donald Trump on side. The Ukrainians know that they have to show that they're cooperative and want peace, and actually have said on numerous occasions they don't just want a 30-day ceasefire, but they want a longer-term ceasefire. The Russians don't want a ceasefire, but they don't want to force Donald Trump because he's given them this 50-day ultimatum, and that runs out on the 2nd of September. They don't, in July, need to make a decision about peace talks or any progress. They can wait until closer to the 2nd of September, as long as they can keep Donald Trump on side. As the war in Ukraine goes on, Russia's still trying to suggest to the rest of the world that it's a major player, and to suggest to its own people that it has got military capability. So it's carrying out a very large naval exercise using its Pacific Fleet, its Baltic Fleet and its Arctic Fleet coming into the North Atlantic. The one fleet it's not using is its Black Sea Fleet because Ukraine has constrained that virtually to port. About 150 ships that are out. Now that is not a lot when it's split between all of those different fleets. The one thing they won't have is an aircraft carrier in any of them. The Russians only ever had one aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, which caught fire a number of years ago, was put into dry dock for repair, caught fire again in dry dock, and we're expecting the Russians to make a final decision to scrap it. They can't afford to repair it, and that leaves them without this blue water power projection capability. Why are they doing it? They're doing the exercises to say to their own people, we can still do stuff. We're still a major global player. They're using that same message to go out to their global partners, the Chinese, the Indians, and others in particular. They're saying to their naval forces that we're still a strong power and we're still playing. So this is all about image rather than capability. So is anything significant going to come out of it? No, not really. So yesterday we saw something that was slightly worrying. We saw the first demonstrations on the streets of Kyiv against a policy that President Zelensky was pushing and that the Ukrainian parliament had voted on. And it was weakening the independence of the Ukrainian National Anti-Corruption Bureau, or NACB. Now, President Zelensky came in on an anti-corruption ticket. Ukrainian democracy is very, very young. It came from an old Soviet-style government underpinned by corruption into a democracy that still had corruption running through it. Zelensky is the first president to come in to try and tackle that corruption, and this was his first attempt at doing it. He turns around and says he's not trying to weaken it, he's trying to remove or set the conditions to stop the Russian influence that he thinks there is in the way the NACB has been working. But no matter what the facts are, the concerning thing is there has been a demonstration in Kyiv against Zelensky's policies. That is something that the Russians will look at finding some way of trying to exploit, and in the information domain spin it in a way that it makes it more anti-Zelensky. We'll see that focused on the United States in particular, because of course Donald Trump, in some of his historical interactions with Zelensky, has not suggested he's a Zelensky fan. And if the Russians can turn Donald Trump back again anti-Zelensky, that's what they'll want to do. Western governments are relying on Ukraine's anti-corruption stance to continue the support and the political support that they're giving to the Ukrainians. This could be significant. Not answering some of your questions this week, and just to be clear, I'm going to answer things from a slightly different perspective to Jerome. He's a journalist, I'm a former senior intelligence officer and NATO planner, so I'll approach things from a slightly different perspective. First question this week is, when do you think Ukraine is going to receive the latest batch of sophisticated weapons that NATO will buy from the United States? And this is the European side of NATO buying from the United States. I would say that Ukraine has probably received the first ones. What you tend to find is that an announcement is made after the first weapons have been supplied, so that their supply chain can't be intercepted by the Russians. The first ones coming in will be Patriot missiles, almost certainly coming from Germany, because Donald Trump suggested to European nations that they supply from their own stocks, and the United States would very quickly backfill those supplies. So that takes any delay out of it. Whether we're going to see cruise missiles, more ATACMS, or other natures coming in, and when they're going in, difficult to say, but there will be big packages going in depending on what's available. And of course, European nations have got some of the ATACMS missiles, they've got the Patriots, and I think for the Ukrainians, the Patriots are the most important. So I'm going to bunch a few questions together for this next one. Effectively, there's a number of questions that come in from you, which are very valid. You're asking why the Ukrainians want Tomahawk cruise missiles or Taurus cruise missiles if they've got Scalp and Storm Shadow. And if you look at the news, the Ukrainians have been able to fly drones thousands of kilometers and hit targets inside Russia. So why does Ukraine need all of these different types of missiles? It comes down to the design of missiles. There's two elements to the design of a missile. The first one is the package that's used to deliver a warhead. So the range that can go over, whether it's a cruise missile, whether it's a ballistic missile, whether it's a drone. And some of them have got different ranges. The Taurus missile's got about twice the range of the Scalp, which is the French variant of the Storm Shadow. That means that there's a greater number of targets it can hit, or it can use a longer route to get to those targets, avoiding Russian air defense capabilities. Again, the same with the Tomahawk cruise missile. That's longer range than the Scalp and Storm Shadow. But the second thing is, not all missiles are the same. They're not all the same because it's not just down to range and the way they fly, it's down to the warhead that's on them. So the Storm Shadow and Scalp missile has got a particular type of warhead that is effective against certain targets where it can penetrate deep into them and attack those targets deep underground. The Taurus missile is better designed for infrastructure like bridges and again has got a warhead that can deal with that. The Tomahawk cruise missile has got a variety of different warheads that can be put on for the different targets. And it's matching the delivery mechanism, the type of missile, the range that you have to go over, and the type of warhead that you need means that you have to have this effectively golf bag of different missile systems to allow you to have an effect. The big target that the Ukrainians are after is the Kerch Bridge. The Storm Shadow and Scalp warhead is okay against that target, but it would be better if they could get some of the warheads that are available for the German supplied Taurus missile or the Tomahawk cruise missiles. They'd have a greater percentage chance of destroying the target in their first attack. And you only get one go at doing it for a first time. The Russians would be ready the second time. And I think, here's where I'm putting my crystal ball on from an intelligence and a planning perspective, we've got the 50-day, Donald Trump's 50-day timeline running out on the 2nd of September. The Ukrainians will want to push the Russians to the negotiating table if they can do that, and therefore by end of August, if they're going to hit the Kerch Bridge again, that's when they're likely to do it. So final question, you're putting me in the spot here. You're asking, what is victory going to look like? It depends on which side you're looking at it from. From the Ukrainian side, victory is very simple. It's the restoration of the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, including Crimea, with no Russian troops and no Russian control over any parts of it. From a Russian perspective, it's relatively simple. They've got a number of things that they can call as victory. It all depends what Vladimir Putin wants to do, because he's a dictatorship, he controls the information domain, and he can set the conditions for victory. What he wants is the complete destruction of Ukraine. He wants Ukraine to disappear as a country, to be subsumed into Russia. But if that can't happen, he wants Ukraine to become a puppet state, a bit like Belarus, and a vassal working to the Tsar that Putin wants to be. If he doesn't get that, the third thing that Vladimir Putin wants to do, and this is what he keeps bringing out in the peace negotiations with the Ukrainians, is to be given the whole of the Donbass region, even the bits that he hasn't captured. And within that, make sure that the Ukrainians retain no long-term call over that territory, including Crimea, and that Ukraine can't rearm, can't rebuild its military, can't join the EU, can't join NATO, can't have any help whatsoever in building up any form of defence forces in the future. I think Putin is being slightly unfair, is a polite way of describing what he's doing. Completely unrealistic is a more accurate way of describing what's going on. But what this shows is that the two sides are not on the same piece of paper. The rest of the international community wants the two sides on the same piece of paper, and victory for the rest of the international community would be something that stops the fighting in Ukraine, stops the deaths, stops the political capital of our governments across Europe and the United States having to worry about Ukraine, and stops us having to spend lots of money on dealing with Ukraine. Whether that is a victory for one side or the other, where it's going to lead to is difficult to tell. It could, if we're looking to the future, be some form of scenario like we had in the Korean Peninsula, where there's a demilitarized zone and a cessation of hostilities, but not a final peace. We've got a long way to go before we get anywhere near any of that. Okay, thank you for watching. If you've got any further questions and any specifics from me, from an intelligence perspective or from a planning perspective, please put them below, and I'm going to be back next week and I will endeavour to answer them. But until then, I'll see you.